So like what I would like to plant into that soil of that question is of who the audience is I would say our audiences are real people, and our audiences are big people. Like our audience can handle themselves is what I'm saying.
Okay.
We don't need
People
to
like
pan
to, yeah, like to think for themselves and not have all their information spoon fed to them by big industry,
Yep.
government.
One of the big things of this podcast is we're big on discomfort. So people
Okay.
don't come here for comfort. People don't come here for agreement. They don't come here for conformity. Does that give you something to?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's good. Good, yeah. So let it all hang out a bit. That's fine.
Mm.
Okay. And you
Right,
had a
Dan.
chance to read. Did you guys read both of my recent articles on COVID, or was there one in particular that you? I know I did one on sort of a trauma-informed perspective, really looking at both sides, and then the other I expanded more on the fear campaign. The government's fear campaign to and associated industries to try to push through certain policies, and then challenge that, really thinking that's not a very helpful approach for
It's very effective.
what's that?
It's very effective if you want to push something.
Yeah, behavioral change. Yeah.
And I'm so keen to go into more detail about this, and I'm mindful that the more we sort of discuss things here, I
Yeah,
don't want it to take away from when
that's
we
right.
step into the ring. So why don't we
Yeah, let's
step
head
into
there.
the
That's good. I feel like I have enough. I just kind of wanted a little. Yeah, I think you've answered the questions that helped me get a sense of where to go. So that's good.
great? Let's put the walk-in music on, Dan.
Okay.
Do you wanna open the podcast?
Is this
Yes.
oh, by the way, is this going to be both video and audio or just audio? How do you guys usually present it?
Well, we often do at least like traditionally I did both, and then for the last I don't know how many episodes we've done now, Dan, 5 or 6. So the podcast started with just me, and then Dan came in as a co-host about 6 episodes ago. And from there, we've really started doing just audio only, but video snippets. But this one here, I feel like this one is applicable to so many more people than what a lot of our. No, that's not the truth. The truth is, I would like to be it open. I would like to have it open to the possibility of it being a full video release as well as an audio, but only to show, because this is an authentic conversation. I think it's important that people see, like it's more than a two-dimensional experience.
Mhm.
If you're okay with that, Paris.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yeah.
Cool. Should we kick it in the guts, Trev?
Okay.
You want to, you go ahead, Dan.
All right. Oh, welcome everyone to our podcast, the Plant a Seed podcast. G'day, Jono.
Hey, Dan.
Well, it's been rainy and we've been stuck inside quite a bit. I've been listening and reading a little bit, and I came across some work by Dr. Paris Williams, and I was just really blown away by the level of analysis that this man has put into what we're going through with the COVID situation. And I read more and found that Paris Williams has got a really interesting background, including being a hang gliding instructor, having a degree in ecology as well as psychology, and doing work all over psychology around psychosis and extreme states. And so we thought we would welcome Paris on to our podcast and learn more about what you know. Paris, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Would you like to take a couple of minutes to give us some background about where you're from and where you're at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from the United States, raised in Northern California, but lived kind of all around, really lived in Utah, Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, and also traveled to other parts of the world. I spent the first kind of 10, 15 years of my life primarily in the hang gliding world. So doing research and development of hang gliders and teaching and doing competition. Had a really wonderful run. Actually ended up winning a world championship and multiple national championships. And then I went through, I'd say, a bit of my own crisis in my late 20s. Kind of long story short, had a lot of trauma of my own in my childhood, and managed to just kind of leave that on the ground and spend as much time in the sky as possible. But then eventually it all kind of came to a head in my late 20s, and went through a bit of a crisis myself. And as part of my own healing journey through that, I ended up got really into mindfulness meditation, which is basically just a simple practice of just being with your mind and body in an open, curious kind of way, what's going on, and just trying to be present with your sensations and just general physical and personal experience. And then that led me down the path of going into psychology and helping other people, particularly trauma. So I became really interested in people recovering from traumatic events, and where that takes people in the most extreme places. You know, people experience a lot of fear, a lot of trauma. They can end up going into substance dependency issues. They can go towards obviously aggression, suicidality, even psychosis. So there's a lot of kind of dark territory people can head into if they spend a lot of time, if they've experienced a lot of fear and trauma, and then that's not resolved properly. So then I became a clinical psychologist. Did a lot of research on people who had fully recovered, so from really extreme, so people who've gone like really far down that rabbit hole and actually experienced psychosis, and then I experienced people who had fully recovered from that, and just looked at, you know, the whole journey of what is it like to actually go into a kind of madness process and to actually come out the other end. And I moved here to New Zealand, it would be almost 9 years ago now. So I've actually married a Kiwi. We've been together about 20 years. She's a hang glider pilot herself. So we actually met in Australia during hang gliding competitions 20 odd years ago. She lived with me in the US for a while, and then they kidnapped me, brought me over here. I'm actually really happy to be here. My country's been, well, it's kind of interesting. My country was falling apart, the US, and then I came here feeling like it was a bit of a sanctuary. And now it's like, oh no, now New Zealand's falling apart. So a little bit concerned about that, as I'm sure a lot of people are. But anyway, I've been working as a clinical psychologist here now since I've been here. So I was licensed in the US and brought that over here. And been doing a lot of private practice work, ACC work, kind of a little bit of everything. But again, particularly focused on trauma. So a lot of supporting people through different kind of traumatic events, whether, you know, vehicle accidents or physical or sexual abuse, assaults, substance dependency. So I've been continuing to do a lot of that work, as well as family and couples support, so supporting groups as well. And now I'm in Dunedin. I was in Tauranga for a while, and I've been in Dunedin for about a year, and we're actually establishing a kind of a sustainable farm and community here in Dunedin at the moment. I think I'll leave it there. Kind of an overview anyway, where I'm at.
And just to add to that, Paris, you also have some qualifications in ecology. Is that correct?
Yeah, so what I did, a degree in ecology as well. And so I've always been really interested in sustainable living, and really kind of the interface between ecology and psychology has been one aspect of my interest. So one of the things that my partner and I have been doing is called ecotherapy, which is actually about using the outdoor experience, connecting with nature, connecting with our fellow earthlings as a way to support healing on both the individual level and also an environmental level, kind of recognizing that a lot of the harm that we experience personally and environmentally are really closely related to disconnect, you know, generally disconnecting from our natural world. So as we connect more fully, you know, with the natural world, it's both really healing for ourselves as individuals, but also we become more aware of, oh gosh, look at what we're doing to the environment, and we become more mindful and move in a direction of sustainability. So it's kind of a win-win, this kind of ecotherapy approach.
Kind of like what we're doing out there is what we're doing in here as well.
Yeah, it's a really good way to put it. It's kind of a projection of the kind of the chaos inside and the chaos outside are definitely very closely related.
I could share vividly on that. Most of the listeners will know, but just for you, Paris, I was a chemical agricultural chemical specialist for some time. I was a highly intensive, conventional, high input, high output farm manager for over a decade, and I can share from experience that the way we treat our ecosystems is literally reflective of who we are and our being, who we are and our relationships and our families, and can definitely relate to the late 20s. I wonder why that is, late 20s, Saturn returns. I mean, I learned a lot, in that age, 28 years old, when it all sort of came home to roost for me. But yeah, let's go into I think the natural progression from here would be to talk about what's so right now for you. Let's bring it to now.
Yeah. Well, I know you contacted me after having read my recent articles on COVID and just some of my concerns about the way it's being managed. Coming from one of the things that kind of occurred to me is I have no idea, who sort of all the different people that are involved in this sort of government policy and health policy, but it doesn't seem like they consulted experienced psychologists, because the way it's generally being managed is likely to probably cause a lot more harm than benefit in our society and individually and collectively. So it's kind of like this tunnel vision happening on, generally speaking, on this sort of one trick pony of just get everybody vaccinated and throw everything else sort of under the bus, it kind of seems like. And so I've been really concerned about that, just as someone who's been really aware of what happens when you, let me back up. So the definition of trauma essentially is experiencing some kind of threat to yourself. And it could be like a literal threat to your physical self, like I'm going to get physically harmed or die or something like that. Or it could be more like to your essential self, like, for example, say sexual abuse is an example where I may not think I'm going to die, but still my essential self is getting violated in some way. Also, same thing with drugs. So when and medical interventions. So medical interventions and drugs, et cetera, are, they are essentially going into your essential self on some level. And so trauma being a combination of threat to self combined with powerlessness or helplessness. So whenever you have those two ingredients, you have the recipe for trauma, basically. Or technically, we would call it a traumatic event. And then you have a trauma response, which is there's something happening to me. It feels scary. It feels threatening, and I don't really have the power to stop it, or I have little power to stop it or prevent it. Then I'm probably going to have a trauma response. And where do we go? We go into a very different state. We're typically either going to be in a state of thriving or surviving, like the way that all living organisms, sort of, you might say, work. Is it's really hard to be in both survival mode and thriving mode at the same time. We tend to be in one state or the other. And normally when things are going pretty well and I'm feeling connected, with my family and my friends and et cetera, my environment, I'm going to be in a pretty good state. We call that social engagement. We feel relatively peaceful and easeful. I'm relatively healthy. But as soon as that traumatic event happens, suddenly we'll shift into a survival state. And so much changes physically, emotionally, psychologically. We become, instead of becoming dominated more by a state of what we might call love or companionship, friendship, these kinds of qualities, compassion. Now I'm dominated more by fear, by hatred, greed, hoarding. So these qualities now become more my state when I'm in a trauma response. And what I've been generally seeing is the way that the government has taken this increasing power over stance for managing this, basically taking people's power away, their choice to decide, what medical intervention they're going to have and whether they can even maintain their livelihood and where they can go. As soon as you start taking away people's basic rights, these kind of fundamental rights and ability to sort of have sovereignty over your body and freedom, civil liberties, then, and especially if it's coming from an industry, an organization that's more powerful than me, I'm going to have a trauma response. It's going to vary a lot depending on the person, obviously, depending on your past, your history, how much on board you are with that particular, policy. If I'm like totally on board with that policy, then it's not going to feel so threatening. But if I'm not in some way, if there's particular experience of threat, then I'm going to start to, go into that response. And as I do that, not only do I start to feel these kinds of emotions, fight, flight stuff, fight, flight, freeze, basically, that's the kind of trauma response we go through. Fight is about anger, rage. Flight is about fear, terror. And freeze is about despair, helplessness. Those start to take over. And my capacity to think clearly. So the actual part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is actually the part of the brain most associated with what we call executive functioning, the ability to think clearly and rationally about things and all of this, that actually goes offline as more of my energy gets devoted to just trying to survive. So you might think of it like, so if you use the theory of evolution, right? So according to the theory of evolution, we come from indigenous ancestors, the plains of Africa. And when we were being attacked by a pride of lions or something like that, in that moment, I don't really need to think very clearly. I just need to get the hell out of there. I just need to fight or flight. So all of our resources, when we feel threatened, goes into just surviving this moment. And so then we lose capacity for sort of, rational thought. And we also become very polarized. It becomes this us versus them. By going to the state where it's me versus the enemy, I quickly have to identify the threat. And even if it's wrong, if I can't identify the threat, it's a much worse experience to have this kind of generalized anxiety. So it's really important. My whole being tries to identify this threat in some way. And there's a sense of increasing polarization between me and my tribe versus the threat. The threat might be another tribe, or it might be the pride of lions, or whatever. And then everything in my being is about finding the enemy and neutralizing the enemy. So what we end up having here is we have a state now where we're putting people into so much fear. And I'm going to throw some opinions out here, but generally speaking, there's been a lot of exaggeration. I'm not invalidating the harm of COVID and coronavirus. Obviously, it does significant harm. But what I've seen, I've been following the research pretty clearly, is there's been a real exaggeration, like really ramping up on the fear pedal more than what's actually seems to be indicated by the actual harm of it, and exaggerating a lot of statistics about that. So ramping up the fear around the virus. And then really minimizing the harms of the vaccines themselves. So what you end up, because this is coming from the mainstream, probably the majority of the population are kind of getting their information from the government sources and the sort of mainstream media. And that's what they're receiving. Oh my God, this really terrifying virus is going to come, this huge plague. And the vaccines are completely safe and effective. And all we have to do is take the vaccines, and then the problem will go away. Right? We'll neutralize that threat essentially. Right? We can get back to our lives. So that's the story we're being told. So what does it do for the majority of the population? They get into a state of fear, and the threat's the virus, and the threat is anybody who challenges the vaccine. Right? Anybody who doesn't get on board with that, they're the threat. They're the enemy tribe. Now, if you're on the other side of the coin, and maybe you don't trust the mainstream media, you don't trust the government so much, but maybe there's a lot of good reasons for that. Like personally, part of my own doctoral research was actually looking at the corruption within the pharmaceutical industry. I spent years actually going deep into the corruption there. So I don't personally have a lot of faith and trust in the pharmaceutical industry. And I also, in just my profession as a clinical psychologist, I've seen a huge amount of harm caused by, particularly psychiatric drugs. It's kind of my field, but I've looked at other domains. And one thing I've learned is it's a money-making, very powerful corporate industry. And profit goes really above. It's not really, number one is about making as much money as possible for your shareholders when you're a corporation like that. Number two or three, or maybe even lower, is the well-being of the people. It's really more about making money. And it's a hard thing to acknowledge, but it's kind of the reality when you're looking at such big, powerful players like the pharmaceutical industry. So a lot of us have a healthy skepticism, you might say. Like, not to throw away, there's a lot of good drugs that really help people, and there's a lot of corruption in the field. So those of us who don't just look at the mainstream media, but like myself, I actually go to the peer-reviewed research. I really look closely at all the research that's coming out about the vaccines, about the virus. You kind of go, wait a minute, there's a huge disconnect here. This isn't lining up with what we're being told, which if you already have mistrust, it's going to make you have more mistrust now, because like they're either directly lying to us or they're just extremely incompetent. But either way, that doesn't feel very safe. Like, I don't feel like I'm really being tended to and carried away here by the powers that be. And now they're actually wanting to take away, they're trying to force something into my system that's actually a little bit scary, like it does have significant threats associated with it. So this is this is going to evoke a trauma response in me. Like, hey, they're trying to force something into my body that I'm actually like not totally on board with. And they're threatening to take away really important civil liberties, right? Take away my livelihood, my job, my freedoms. So threat. And again, now I'm going to, so if I'm in that group, I'm going into a threat response, and I'm trying to find the enemy. Who's the enemy? The enemy are the people who are trying to take away my civil liberties, and people are trying to force this intervention against me. Will force me into taking it. So now we basically set up the situation for two opposing tribes. So from a psychological point of view, the whole way this thing has been managed, and again, I don't know how intentionally or unintentionally it's been. I'll let people form their own opinions about that. But the way it's been managed is a perfect storm, creating two extremely polarized tribes, a lot of fear, both tribes seeing each other as the enemy, and not able to think very rationally. Again, when we get into the state of fear, we get very polarized. We need to find the enemy. We need to try to neutralize them. We have a lot of fear. We have anger, helplessness. Those are the fight, flight, freeze responses. And we have a hard time thinking very clearly. So this is what we've created. We've created almost this perfect storm of these two opposing camps, and that see each other as the enemy. And what's so sad about this, the way I see it, is we already, we're entering into a lot of crises in the world in general, not just COVID, but there's going on with the breakdown of the biosphere, mass species extinctions. There's just so much going on that we need to manage, right? And at this point, to be drawn into almost, essentially towards a kind of civil war framework, it's the last thing we need in our communities right now. We really need to be sort of all united and working together collaboratively to try to, manage the different crises. So actually, I know I did kind of a long deal there, so I'll just pause there and see if you guys have any.
I really appreciate the image of a storm, because before you came on, Paris, we drew a card. We have these cards by an artist by the name of Vanessa Smith, and sometimes we just draw cards for a bit of inspiration, and holding space in the eye of the storm came up, and that to me seems relevant. Like, the storm is going on. You've got this perfect storm that you talk about, and there's not many in the middle, and I find myself in the middle being quite bewildered by this aggression that's building up, and this fear that is just sort of growing, and really in opposition. There's so much tension in this opposition, and not a lot of really clear thinking. So
it's very us and them, and I'd like to go into this fear thing a bit more. There's a few things that came up on that beautiful piece in Paris. One thing that came up was in my research and experience in the pharmaceutical and the agricultural chemical space, which is actually one the same if you look deeply. Your invitation for us to consider the wellness being perhaps down at 6 or 7 on the priority list was like a surprise to me. I think that's being very generous, because my experience is that actually wellness doesn't pay, because then there's no symptoms to treat. In a world of symptom treatment, we need illness, and that to me has been the focus. And it is a perfect storm as well, like a perfect storm, and more us and them as in nature, and us as some sort of dominant being that can control. But I want to come back to this fear thing and just how effective it is in forcing a and we'll also talk more about distinctions of and definitions of terms like force versus power, which I think is an important one. But in this case, forcing a narrative on the masses. It's very effective at that. And I'm fascinated by the methods used as I dive deeper into my own journey of psychology, spirituality, the phenomenon of ontology, is actually the subtle, like it's very powerful. Things like the noises used on certain advertisements, the sounds. It's been so far as like these sounds and I'd love to be corrected on this, like it's not intentional, but I can't help but think what's been so far is like these really like bulletin, like news flash sounds, like prick your eyes up, and then everywhere you look is yellow and black, which if you look into colors, you can relay sharp yellow to actually a fear thing, and then yellow on black as well. Look at the bee, and then and the sound. And then now with this, and so let's identify the enemy. That's how you identify it. Wow, there's the enemy. And then now the narrative is portraying the direction to run in, because it's another thing I heard in your sharing was like identify the enemy and then identify the direction you need to run in. And so the identification of the enemy is really obvious because it's painted yellow and black and it's got all these sounds to point you in the direction of it. And then all these images as well. So we can associate an image with this thing, which has not even, as far as I'm aware, been effectively isolated yet, which is this virus or these variants. And now the answer is, okay, put this substance in your body. It's going to keep you safe. And all of a sudden, there's with the new introductions of the vaccine passports in New Zealand, I've noticed like there's a change in the color of those banners. It's a softer color. Like all of a sudden, oh, relief. And I don't know, this is my own personal thinking. I've not read or studied anything on this, but a softer contrast, a softer yellow, like a pastel yellow. Ah, thank goodness. And the sounds now on the ads are a more gentle sound, a more relaxing sound. Like, thank goodness we're safe now.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And so what, essentially, if you put someone in, you get someone into a kind of fear response, the most evolved part of our nervous system, particularly the prefrontal cortex, and the part that can actually, pause and think and contemplate and consider, goes offline, and we become more like reptiles. And literally, we kind of share this sort of reptilian part of our brain, the brain stem, et cetera, with reptiles and amphibians, simpler organisms. And when we're operating from that space, things get very simple, good, bad, friend, foe, food, poison. And we're also very much in the sensory realm, where physical sensations and simple things like certain colors, like you said, and physical sensations and sounds will either have a quality of pleasant or unpleasant. So we're in the field of pain, pleasure, really simple state of how our whole nervous system is organized in a very simple way. So if you really want to create behavioral change, this is really well established in behavioral psychology, you place someone into a fear response. And again, I'm not saying this is intentional. I'm just going to leave the politics aside around that. But if you did, like if I actually wanted to be, a powerful dictator and try to get the masses to do my bidding, this is what I would do. I try to create as much fear as possible, so that executive functionings and also the capacity to have kind of complex and nuanced understanding, all of that goes out the window. The capacity to relate to people who have different opinions than me, that goes out the window. And instead, I'm in this very simple state where it's friend, foe, like you're either with me or you're against me. And if you're against me, I have to neutralize you as quickly as possible. and also pleasure, pain. So we're kind of in this real simple state. And there's the idea that certain stimuli, like really, like you're saying, certain sounds, certain colors, certain things will either put me into that pleasure, that approach or avoidance place. So I'm very simple, and it's very easy now to convince me of anything because I can't think very clearly. And because I'm so afraid, I'm just trying to go towards peace and go towards safety as quickly as possible and go away from the danger as quickly as possible. And I can't really think all that clearly about it. So I just have to sort of listen to whoever I trust, power that be, to tell me, this is safe. Okay, run towards that. This is dangerous. Run away from that. Kill, get rid of, neutralize that dangerous thing, and embrace this safe thing that is going to save you. So you create this state in people and their whole nervous system and their mind and their brain, which is very simple and actually really easy to manipulate. And so this is what I would do. And this is actually what's happening. And again, I'm not saying it's intentional or not, but this is exactly what we see in the field. The field of New Zealand, the field actually really around the whole world right now. And so you end up with this, right? You end up with this perfect storm of people who was kind of like, we become more and more like sheep or even more like lizards, really simple organisms where we can be directed very easily to just follow the safety and run from the fear or fight the fear, whatever that feared thing is. Either get away from them or neutralize them as quickly as possible. Yeah, and so, and it's actually not rocket science, relatively simple. This, the whole nature of marketing and propaganda and all of that, it's been around for quite a long, almost 80, almost 100 years now that we've understood. So we've refined it, but we've understood that you can really manipulate people quite easily by appealing to these really primal sort of impulses and tendencies within our system.
Yeah, definitely reminds me of marketing and sales, just using those psychological techniques to, and yeah, I agree, it's not necessarily a something that was intentional or non-intentional. Who knows? I tend to believe that it's non-intentional. It's more like a phenomenon, or like a perfect storm, and a bit of opportunism with, if many people are in the survival state that you say, like, we are more manipulatable, and so therefore people will take advantage if they see an opportunity like that. That's my kind of feelings around it. And I sometimes, not very often now, but I sometimes look at the headlines in the media, and just yesterday I think they announced that we've hit 90% vaccination of the citizens of New Zealand. And I wanted to ask, okay, so we've hit 90%. Does that mean, from your understanding, does that mean that we're going to see the fear start to subside now? That people are going to now be like, we've now put the threat at bay. We can now start bringing in more of that thriving state. Do you think that's what we're heading towards?
Well, I think we have this interesting vantage point in New Zealand because we're sort of behind, it seems like in so many things, the rest of the world. I grew out like 6 months, and almost a year behind in many things. So I think we can look around what's happening in other parts of the world to get a sense of where we're heading, because we don't seem to be doing anything particularly different than a lot of the other countries. Which is quite sad in some ways, because we're looking at certain countries that are clearly, they've gone the like mass vaccination, take away civil liberties, punish people who don't follow the protocol, etc. When we look around at other countries that are doing that, and it's not going very well. I mean, and when we're doing the same thing, it's like you would think, we go, that's not really working very good over there. Maybe we should try something different. So I think, so far as I can tell, I think we're going to end up going down the same path as what we see, like, say in, or the UK is a good example, or Israel, or some of these other. US is an interesting place. I'd say the US as well. The US is kind of probably has more charge in some ways, but probably more resistance. But which essentially is there's two things happening. The vaccine is showing to not be nearly as safe and effective as we're told. And there's only so long you can sort of promote that narrative before the truth hits you in the face. Like, that's what's happening around the world. It's like, wait, we've reached 90%. Some countries are like almost 100%. And yet it's not stopping the spreading of the virus at all. The transmission rate seem, as far as and I've done actually I've looked at over 35 peer-reviewed studies now on transmission. And the consensus is pretty clear that the vaccines have very little effect on transmission. They do seem to have some effect on how sick an individual will get. Like if you've been vaccinated, your own, the severity of the illness for you is likely to be less, especially if you're an older person or with comorbidities. If you're younger, then especially like a child, doesn't seem to have hardly any effect at all in that way. But transmission doesn't seem to help. The people are getting this, oh yes, vaccine, hope, safety, run to the vaccine, and then we can get back to our lives now. We've nailed it, and then go, oh shit, no, we haven't. Look, it's still spreading, not actually working. It's not stopping the transmission. So you might get a temporary sort of relief, but then when it hits you that actually didn't work, then you're right back in the fear again. It's like, oh gosh, okay, the booster, that will solve it. Third one, the fourth one, the fifth one. How far do you have to go? So in a way, the particular tunnel vision the strategy of tunnel vision leads us, as far as I can tell, and I'm going to state this as an opinion, down the path of perpetual fear. It's not going to, you're going to have it's a little bit like gambling. You know how when you go and gamble, the most addictive things are when you have like intermittent rewards that are, so if you gamble, for example, you sooner or later, you're going to win something. And you get pleasant sensations, wonderful, I won. But then of course you lose again, ouch, ouch, and then you win again. And those are actually more addictive than any drug, because especially when you don't know exactly when the next sort of win is coming. And in a way, we've kind of created this system now where we think, oh yes, we're going to win, we're going to get everyone vaccinated, and we'll be back to like, oh shit, didn't happen, pain. Okay, but this will save us. And so we actually end up in this, again, it just kind of reinforces that whole fear cycle and gets us more entrenched and maladaptive strategies, very much like an addiction. Whereas, for example, instead, if, like I'm someone, I'm really into holistic wholeness, I have certificates and all of this stuff, I'm really into physical fitness. And I've been following all that research too. And there's so much really solid evidence-based peer-reviewed research out there for things like nutrition, for things like obesity or lack of obesity, you might say physical fitness, that these are extremely effective in reducing the severity of the illness. So for example, vitamin D, just not being vitamin D deficient is a huge, I should say vitamin D deficiency is a huge factor in becoming severely ill, and not being deficient is a huge factor in having a really good outcomes. Just one simple thing that anyone can do. And yet I have never once heard the government even say that. Obesity, we know really well that obesity is a major factor and likelihood of becoming really sick. And being physically fit is a major factor if not. Like for example, there's been some studies now in nutrition and moving towards more increasing vegetables and fruit. So people with plant-based diets, as a study just came out, have 73% reduced severity of illness. So there's lots of interesting research like this is actually really solid around nutrition and fitness and stress, another really big one. So people who have higher degrees of stress, anxiety, depression, these kinds of trauma, have much higher likelihoods of becoming really sick. And what are we doing? We're creating so much stress. So yeah, just when you look at it holistically, the situation doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It makes total sense.
Well, yeah, if you're pharmaceutical industry, or if you're someone that's so this is the opportunism you talked about, Dan. So regardless of, you don't have to be a so-called conspiracy theorist around the whole thing, but what you can, and again, I'm open, conspiracies are real. Conspiracy just means people getting together and going, hey, let's do this thing and try to, have benefit. But just leaving that aside, the reality is, here we are as a human race, human species around the world mostly, in a kind of, in a scary place, fear response. And there's certain industries that can really capitalize on that. And as far as I can tell, that's exactly what they are doing. They are capitalizing on it. It's like, oh, we can make a lot of money from the situation. Why not, right? And so you end up seeing that happening. So then, if you're a pharmaceutical industry and you make billions, tens, probably hundreds of billions of dollars they're heading towards from the vaccines, then of course you're going to be trying to push the narrative in that direction that's going to make you more money. Why wouldn't you? That's what you do. And what does it do? Well, if we keep people afraid, we keep people taking our products, and they have to keep taking more and more of our products. Wonderful, right? Why wouldn't you, if you're in that position to benefit, why would you? Of course, you're going to be promoting that. And of course, you're going to be minimizing anything that challenges that. I don't know, specifically what's going on with the government. I'll leave that aside. But yeah, what we do see is that's the narrative that's happening. So it's not hard to connect the dots to go, okay, there's opportunistic organizations and industry which are taking extreme advantage of the situation and really minimizing things that can be done that are not profitable. It's not profitable for people to become really physically fit and have good nutrition and try to reduce their stress. But that would be far more effective than what we're doing now. I don't know if that fully answered the question there.
No, it does. It does.
Okay.
And that in itself is part of the addiction as well, like that relief, that feeling of the stress is no more. Like, I think that's critical, that and I've seen these, images of this cycle that you speak of, where it's like, temporary relief, and then more lockdowns, more jabs, temporary release of the people, or openings of freedoms, and then back through again. It seems to be like the perfect storm. And what I also want to go into, what distrust can do to people. Like, is that part of the fear? Because I believe human beings and animals, all you've got to do is walk into a cow shed with a bad mood for the dairy farmers. The cows, they know exactly without saying a word, like, this person is stressed, this person is dealing with something, it's an energy, what have you. Human beings, I believe, have an ability to sense inauthenticity, and when something is not, authentic or real, when someone's hiding something. And we're seeing a lot of what seems to be inauthentic communication, or inauthentic holding of the narrative and suppressing of things that challenge the narrative. For instance, I'll just throw it out there: vaccine injuries. Why isn't that being talked about? It seems to me like it's a far greater threat than the death rate of contracting COVID. Can we go into a bit about trust and what that does to a human being?
So we talked about how when you go into a fear response, there's a tendency to move towards having to identify the fear, and this is where, so you've probably heard of the idea of like paranoid delusion, right? Where when we're in a state of generalized fear, that's like the worst state to be into. We need to find a target. We need to find what's the source of the threat. And so, because even though it's still scary, at least I can organize around it, and I can try to manage that threat. Whereas if I have no idea where the source of the threat is, it's a horrible place to be. Call that free-floating anxiety or generalized anxiety. So the way our mind works is we quickly need to like focus in on the threat, even if it's wrong. Like, and so we often, like, when you talk about people going into paranoid states, it's often what's happening. On some level, there's a experience of free-floating threat, and then they quickly, like, turn it towards the CIA or whatever, the aliens, whatever, something, because at least I feel better. I can manage it somehow. And the truth is, we all do that. You don't have to be in a psychotic state or extreme paranoid state. But when we start to feel afraid, we naturally start to do that. We look for the enemy. So we can call that the sort of enemy image. And it's really important to do that. And when we're already feeling like threatened in some way, we're going to become more and more vigilant towards the threat. And like you say, we have, we're intuitive. As they say, 80% of communication is nonverbal. So when I see someone's words are telling me this, but their whole nonverbal language is telling me that that's bullshit, then I'm going to be like, oh, flag, this person might be the enemy, right? So I'm going to shift into this enemy stance. I'm going to start feeling increasingly mistrustful. So there's a vicious cycle between trust, or I should say mistrust, and threat, and enemy image. So they sort of positively reinforce each other. So as soon as I feel mistrust, especially if I'm already feeling threatened, I'm going to start to put that person in the enemy camp. And then I'm going to be more vigilant towards them. And now I'm going to probably get a little bit of tunnel vision because I'm put them in the enemy camp. I might filter out things that might tell me actually that that's a good person with good intention. And we can become really like, again, we get into that really polarized tunnel vision where we start seeing each other as the enemy.
Wow, including all those that band with that camp. Like
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where you end up with, war, civil war, genocide, all this stuff has the same, the Holocaust. It all has the same underlying mechanism. Scapegoating. Scapegoating is the exact same thing. I'm trying to find who's the problem here, and so I can identify them and neutralize them. And so, and then the whole thing, then we get into increasing threat response, and now I can't think clearly anymore. And so it's really hard to convince me otherwise. No matter how much information comes in, goes, wait a minute, that person's actually, a good person and they have good intentions. I can't see that anymore because I've become such strong tunnel vision with my own threat response. And same happening in both directions. So then you have two groups of people that end up like hating each other, and they see each other as evil, and eventually they end up killing each other, right? In the worst case situations, war and whatnot.
Mm.
Whereas when we come out of the threat response, we start, so the solution, how do you get out of that? When you actually get into that, it's really hard to get out. Most people who can think about that, like, in your marriage, or if you have, family members or a couple or something like that, we can get into those states where we see each other like the enemy, and it can be quite hard to get out of that sometimes, right? The only way to really get out of that is first of all, you have to start to feel safe. As we start to feel safe, our nervous system settles, and then we can actually start to move into a more, the prefrontal cortex and our more evolved parts of our nervous system come online, and then I can start thinking in a more nuanced way.
And then comes I'm sorry, babe, or
yeah, there you go. That's right.
I can see that I really wasn't listening.
Oh, that's right. I screwed up. I can see. That's right. You are a loving human being, and you have good intentions. And I saw you like a little devil there for a while, but I could see how that was a bit distorted. Exactly right. And so once we start to feel safe, now we can start to actually have real dialogue with each other, and we can start to see each other as just human beings. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, we're all human beings, just find the best we can to meet our needs and survive and thrive, right? We're all the same. But when we get locked into these polarized camps, we forget that. We see each other as devils, they're wicked people.
Yeah. When thriving is not a visible, like what's there for me as you painted that picture, Paris, is like when survival is the goal, thriving is not an option. It's like a pipe dream.
It's either survive or thrive. We can't really it's really hard to be in both states at the same time. So we have to get out of survival mode and into thriving mode, and then we can actually have proper dialogue and deal with the situation in a much more effective way.
And one is very much grounded in not being present. In fact, future-based fear, predictions, anxiety. Like, is what I've discovered is anxiety for me is just the process where you're constantly stuck in a future or in the past, and that's survival. And most people spend probably most of their lives there. Sadly, I did. And then I discovered this world of being present, being here in the now, and then, oh man, this is what it is to connect. This is what it is to let go of fear and to not, delve into drama, because that's addictive in itself. And so what I'm hearing is thriving is to be really present, and to have a real say in the matter.
Really well said. Really well said. That's right, because we're in a threat response. We're trying to go, okay, what was that stuff that happened in the past? And, we're really vigilant. How does that determine that this horrible thing is going to happen in the future? So we're going past, future, trying to identify the threat and deal, forecast this horrible thing that's going to happen. Right? Whereas when we're thriving, when we're in a safe place, then we can actually be present. And that's also a self-reinforcing experience, presence and safety. So even if I'm actually in a real fear response, and I can take a moment and actually, this is where like the idea of mindfulness, just real basic mindfulness, can be so helpful. Like to go and actually just savor a beautiful sunset, or actually have a real quality connection with a person or an animal or my dog or whatever it might be, or to go out and, you know, in a bushwalk and actually just really enjoy the beauty of the ecosystems and the lush life. So that's all about presence. And when we become present, that starts to facilitate safety, and then the reinforce. And the more safe I feel, the more present I can feel. So yeah, it's really well said. That's a very important link about presence and safety. And
is it safety or is it lack of fear?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm sort of saying safety is sort of the antithesis of fear in this case. But, the sense of I feel relatively, like I feel safe enough. I mean, there's never perfect safety, is there? But I feel safe enough where I'm not, fear is no longer in the driver's seat. And like I used in my second article, I talk about love being in the driver's seat. You know, this is about like actually, and what I mean by the word love, I'm using it in a very kind of universal sense of feeling connection, feeling deeply connected with another being, again, whether it's a plant or an animal or a human or the earth in general, you know, that's what I'm calling love. And we go into the state of connection when we feel this way, when we feel safe. And once we feel connected, then we can go, oh, this person who I thought was the devil is actually just another human being. And right, I can see they did some really maybe horrible shit or whatever, you know, some of the behavior might have been really harmful, but I can actually see now that they were just trying the best they could to, you know, to meet their needs. And they were maybe in a fear state themselves, you know, and so they weren't thinking for themselves. And so I can actually maybe forgive them. And now we can talk about how do we move forward so everybody's needs met. But as long as we stay stuck in fear, we can't do that. And then the inevitable outcome of that is war and genocide and civil war. These are the inevitable outcome if you can't come out of that fear response. It gets really bad. We know that from history. It gets really, really, really bad. And so that's where my red flags are going crazy right now. I'm like, we know where this movie ends. You know, if we stay in this kind of response, it doesn't end well. And so how do we help people come out and start to feel safe enough to where we can start to dialogue, where we can start to come out of the us versus them and be curious about everybody's needs. And what we do, one of the approaches I do is called nonviolent communication, which is really simple. You realize that all the bickering that happens is over the particular strategies, the actions that we decide to take, and we fight over that. But underneath that, we're just trying to meet certain needs, and those needs are universal. We all have the same basic needs. We all want to, you know, we all want to feel a sense of belonging and love and support. We also want to have a certain amount of freedom and autonomy, sovereignty. We want to have meaning, right? We have these basic universal needs we all have. And underneath our particular strategies that we're attached to. So when people come together that are fighting, and we can help them to sort of empathize with each other, what that means is actually, can you drop below the level of strategy and go, can you see how this person is just trying to be safe, or they're just trying to meet their need for, you know, maybe support or connection or whatever it might be. And you can see each other's needs. And then, okay, now let's put everybody's needs on the table and forget the strategies that we've been attached to for a moment, and just, okay, these are the needs. So certain, you know, needs for safety and security are up, but also needs for freedom and autonomy. Those are also up too. How do we come up with strategies where everybody can meet those needs well enough? So that's kind of the approach that I think we have to come to here, is a lot of dialogue, like actually, you know, dropping the swords and and our attached strategies for a moment. And so the only way you can do that is you have to have people feel safe. So this is why I'm so anti-mandate, because it's impossible for people to feel safe when you're basically saying, look, I'm going to inject something into your body against your will. And if you don't do it, then I'm going to punish you horribly. I might take away your livelihood. I might take away your freedoms. And for some people who, whatever, maybe they're just ignorant as to the harms of the vaccines, they oh, whatever, you know, it doesn't feel so threatening. But once you actually realize that there's significant harms here, you're going to naturally feel threatened. You go, wait a minute, it's my body. You know, I can't feel safe as long as you're threatened. You need to put the needles away for a minute and let's talk about this so that we can all feel safe.
What about Paris when because I've, you know, heard from so many people who have only taken the jabs to keep their jobs or to be able to travel or, you know, whatever that is, and for the most part it wasn't really a choice. It was like, you know, that it was like in order to. And then I'm painting a picture of what that must be like when I put myself in those people's shoes. Is like, if I had to do something I didn't want to do just to keep my livelihood, would I sell out on other areas? Would I become so resigned that my desire to stand up and actually make a choice and take a stand, even when let's say the effects of, or what this is doing to me and my body and whatever is so clear and transparent, I still wouldn't make that choice because in the past I didn't make the choice. Like what? And I've not framed that very well, but there was a question underneath that is, I wonder what not acting in your own best interests does to the way we think. Does that put us into that bunkered mentality, that sheep-like mentality of please tell me what to do?
Well, if we're in the territory of, because it's being done by those who have more power than me, right? So my government or my employer, whatever it is basically saying to me, look, you have to do this thing. This has potential harm, and nobody can argue with that. Like, I mean, no matter what you might think about the vaccines, you might think the benefits are worth the harm. That's fine. But leave that aside for a moment. It's potentially harmful. The reality is very clear. The evidence is super clear that people die and people get seriously harmed, sometimes for life, from these vaccines. It's a possibility. It could happen to you. And so as soon as someone with a power position says, look, you have to do this threatening thing, or I'm going to punish you, that's actually called abuse. Like, so in family dynamic, that's a definition of abuse, right? Whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, or whatever kind of emotional abuse, it is abuse. And so what happens when people are abused, they end up going into some kind of trauma response on some level, can vary depending on the intensity of the abuse, obviously, or the chronicity of the abuse. It might vary. But we are going to go into some kind of protective response, and we're going to start to see the abuser as the enemy on some level, because they're a threat. They are a threat now. And so we're creating an abusive relationship. We're creating a enemy image relationship now. And okay, it might give me to keep my job, but it's not just going to go away. Like, we've suddenly created a significant rupture in this relationship, whether it's with me and my boss or me and my government, et cetera. There's a rupture. It's happened. There's some harm has happened. And if it keeps happening, it's going to get worse and worse. And if it never gets repaired, then it's probably going to remain. And it's going to have long-term consequences that are going to potentially be really bad. So at some point, you either have to repair it or be prepared for the fact that things are going to get worse and worse, probably, in that relationship.
Holy cow, you've just painted an abusive relationship. Like,
right.
How many people will stay when there's things that are there that are like little payoffs, like the fleeting moments of love being present, dominated by actual physical abuse. Oh no, it's okay, it was my fault. I need to, whatever.
Yeah.
The cycle continues.
Right. And you got the whole cycle of reward and punishment too. I'm in a power position. This is what I want you to do, threatening. And if you do it, I'll reward you. And if you don't, I'll punish you. And the person, some people will be like, fuck this, I'm out of here. But other people are going to be like, it's too scary. I don't want to be on my own, or the punishment is too threatening, or whatever it might be. So, okay, I'll go ahead and put up with that abuse, But ultimately, you end up with a highly dysfunctional relationship. That's where it takes you, and it's not going to end up well for either party in the end. So again, if you're trying to run a democratic system, ideally you want a government run for the people, by the people. Then when you start taking advantage of power and operating with this power over situation, you're adding abuse in a situation, and you're creating a rupture between the people and their representatives, and you're creating distrust. And ultimately, if it goes far enough, the whole system will fall apart. You can't sustain it. At a certain point, it can't sustain itself, and then you end up with civil war and all kinds of horrible shit happen. So it's like you have to ask: is the some people will say, well, the benefits are worth it. The benefits of the vaccine, of getting everyone to take the vaccines, are worth the harms. We know, you could even be honest and go, we know we're causing harms, we know we're causing a lot of trauma, etc. But we think that the benefits are worth it. personally, like looking at this, I just don't see any way in hell it's worth it. Like the amount of like fallout from on so many levels, the psychological fallout, the social fallout, not to mention the adverse effects of the vaccines themselves, and the fact that the vaccines aren't actually even really doing the job they're supposed to be doing. They're not actually stopping transmission, etc. It's like pretty hard to make the case in this case. I mean, if it was like, let's say we had something like, MERS, right, 20%, whatever, fatality rate, which turns out when you have something that high of fatality rate, it's not very transmissible anyway because it kills people so fast, but leave that aside. And you had a vaccine that really was safe and effective, then I could see, okay, well, maybe the argument could be made that you have to do some traumatic stuff here to try to stop that. But in this case, I just don't see it anywhere close to that. Like the amount of harms caused by this approach compared to the benefit. I don't see it. But others do seem to believe that. So we're entitled to our opinion there.
When all you've got is a single source of truth, and it's being, for lack of a better phrase, shoved down your throat. There's a reason why I don't watch the news, or it's that's where I put myself with all my family, most of whom are stuck in the narrative. Is like, I get it. Like, I completely understand when that is what your environment is, when that's what is being said, man, of course, you'd believe it and you'd take it and you'd run with it.
Yeah. And, you consider the framework of the abusive relationship, is this, like if let's say I'm an abuser to maybe my spouse, and I say, look, I'm this is what you have to do, and don't talk to anybody else. And this actually happens in abusive relationships. Like, it's so protective, they prevent, maybe the spouse from even communicating with any other possible source of information. So kind of like gaslighting is a term that's sometimes used for this kind of thing. And so in a way, it's like we're actually being gaslit by our own government. The government's saying, nope, we're your only source of information. If it doesn't come from us, it's misinformation. And we're going to keep taking your powers away, your freedoms away from you, and we keep telling you what to do. So by definition, that's a very abusive relationship. If you put that same context into like a relationship, who would argue with the fact that that's extremely abusive? Mm-hmm. And so that's what's happening. Again, I imagine people on the other side would argue they think that, the benefits are worth it. But if you saw, let's say you saw like a couple like that, where you had a husband who was, abusing their wife in this way and totally preventing her from going anywhere else, talking to anybody else, getting any information elsewhere, who would not say that was like a really abusive relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you talk about gaslighting, and to my understanding, gaslighting is a lot about doubting yourself. Like, you'll have somebody sending you messages that point to your own insecurities, so that you doubt your own intuitions. And to me, like, that's a important thing to be aware of in life, that you have certain intuitions, and we do have this bullshit radar. And if we hear a message and our bullshit radar's going off, our intuition of like, this doesn't feel true, not just what I'm seeing and hearing, but what I'm feeling, and my whole perception of reality, this doesn't feel true. But if we're put into a state where we are kind of like forced, or we just doubt, we constantly doubt that intuition, then that's an incredibly disempowered state, and it feels so important to not be in that state, because that intuition, where there is so much uncertainty and so much fear, and there is no one source of truth. It's so important to hold your intuition and listen to it, and and to hold other people's intuition where they're being authentic and intuitive as valid. Because to me, that's where we can find some truth. So I'm really wondering, how do we assist in allowing people to trust that intuition, and not be gaslighted?
Well, for one thing, again, it comes down, if you look at it kind of neurologically, physiologically, psychologically, our nervous system, as long as we're in a state of heightened fear and threat, it's going to be really hard to have, we're not going to be able to maximize sort of our executive functions, our ability to think clearly about things, our ability to hold nuanced and complex, because this is a nuanced and complex situation. And so the first thing that, like I say, has to happen if I'm working with a person or a family or an organization, so we have to help everyone feel safe first. And how do you do that? We have to stop the threats. We have to stop threatening people with punishments and to do things against their will, coercing them to do things against their will that they perceive as things. It has to, until you stop that, it's really hard to do much else. So I think, like in this case, if I was able to have some input here, it's okay, look, you have to stop the mandates, no matter what your particular beliefs are about the benefits, harms. You have to stop that, because there's too many people feeling really threatened. And you have to stop the punishment and taking away people's freedoms around all of that. Now, there's actually already some other strategies. Obviously, other people are going to be like, well, but wait, I don't want to be around other people who are, they're going to be spreading this virus. I don't want to get it. And so it's actually like, okay, well, if you look at the peer-reviewed research and you get away from the one source and you actually go, and as a PhD, that's what I'm trained in, looking at peer-reviewed research, and not hard to do. You go, well, what's the transmission rates actually like? Let's see if we can help everyone feel a bit safer. Actually, the transmission rates are really like, and there's so much research now. So I've seen at least 35, 40 studies, all saying same thing pretty much, huge. Transmission rates are really not very different at all between vaccinated and unvaccinated. In fact, if anything, there's a slight lean towards more transmissibility for the vaccinated, interestingly enough. But there's very little difference. So getting that message out there will help the people who are really afraid of the virus, understandably, to feel safer. Like, actually, it doesn't matter whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, it's still transmissible. So you don't have to be quite so terrified of the unvaccinated people. And as far as those who are afraid of getting the vaccine, stopping the mandate. So these are things we can do to kind of help everybody feel a little bit safe. And we can do things like rapid antigen testing, right? Like saliva-based antigen, which is a lot better anyway. Because if you're worried about transmissibility, vaccinated, unvaccinated, doesn't make much difference, but you can tell who's positive, right? Who's testing positive for the coronavirus based on antigen testing. And that's, for example, was used in my home state extensively at the moment, California. And it only takes 10 minutes. It's very fast. So you can do things like that. They give people freedom, but also help them feel some degree of safety. And these are basic strategies to help them feel safe. Now, once you get people feeling safe enough and the nervous system starts to settle, then we can start to have proper dialogue with each other. We can, and the other part of that is actually opening the door to information, like actually letting people see, quit hiding from people all the information that's out there about nutrition and obesity and the different age profile, all this stuff. It's so important for people to understand, actually getting accurate information about the adverse events of the vaccine so people can make an informed decision. So as soon as you start opening the door to that, people can settle. And when they settle, the higher functionings of our brain come back online. We stop seeing people as so much the enemy. You can start having what we call collective intelligence emerges. Collective intelligence is this amazing principle. It's very cool, where it's the opposite of groupthink. So groupthink is what happens when we're in a fear state, where we polarize around some particular theme, and then we get tunnel vision, and we have a really hard time with, even if we start having doubts and intuitions, I don't want to challenge the group because I might get ostracized. That's kind of like what you're talking about here, Dan. So you end up, I have these doubts. Something seems wrong. I got a flag, but I better not go there because people are, they're going to vilify me and I'll be ostracized. I'll just kind of toe the line. But as soon as we make it permissible, that we actually appreciate. So the way you get out of groupthink in an organization is you actually assign one or more people to be the devil's advocate. That's how you break groupthink. So you make it permissible. You make it more than permissible for people to have alternative opinions and views and perspectives. So you open the door. You actually educate people. Hey, look, here's how you can get some information. like I have a whole page devoted on my website to how do you educate yourself, and it teaches people how to go get peer-reviewed research and how to read it, and how to break the corporate paywall so you don't have to pay $50 per article. You could actually go and look at the research yourself. You don't have to just listen to the talking heads on the media. You can look at the research study yourself and see what, make your own opinion about it. So actually helping people, and it's not that hard, teaching people how to start to do their own research.
Paris, what's that website quickly?
Oh yeah, cncl.info. cncl.info. And then I have a page called Educate Yourself. And you can actually, we have all the world's academic research papers available for free. Mostly, if you don't know this, you think you have to pay $50 an article, and it's crazy. But anyway, I'll show you how to do that on there. And the other thing that happens once you break groupthink is you get into this collective intelligence where you have lots of different perspectives coming in for the issue, and people have their own wisdoms and experiences. And if you actually honor and acknowledge and are open-minded, you know, of course you're gonna have disagreements, but as long as you appreciate the multiple perspectives, actually the best way to tackle a complex problem. And as long as you feel like we're not each other's enemies, we're all on the same team, then the strategies that emerge are amazing. Like we're smart, you know, human beings are incredibly intelligent people, or beings, creatures. And we can totally deal with this problem. This is not actually that big of a crisis. We're making it so much worse than it needs to be by what we're doing. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that I would do if I was somehow in some kind of up there in the health policy of the government. I encourage these kinds of strategies.
So we're stepping beyond right and wrong. What I heard in your response to Dan's question of, you know, how do we start this process of people, you know, sharing themselves if it may not be, you know, it might be weird or it might be vilified or what have you. Is there something underneath there? Like, again, this is still right or wrong, like our attachment to agreement and having others, or feeling like others must agree with us, or I must agree with others. It's like some sort of attachment that we were born into, like, because we're born into a world of, like, academia says there's a right and wrong. We get put into school where it's like a pass or a fail. There's very little room for diverse perspectives. And it's either you're right or you're wrong. It's either you're in or you're out, you know, that sort of thinking. And one way that I can hear, and as I apply myself to this discussion of how do we go beyond right and wrong, is like, okay, allowing others to have their opinion minus your judgments and assessments, just like accepting that. And that's the love, right? There's like full acceptance of like, okay, this person is only doing and saying what he or she, based on he or her experience of life and current knowledge and understanding, etc., has come to that conclusion. Okay, I accept that. But then also saying and so allowing that to happen, like people then feel, you know, back to safety, safe to share what they have to say, even though it doesn't comply with the narrative. And then outside of that, another thing that as I apply myself to this conversation, I can see would be really powerful is, you know, when you acknowledge that you've been doing something for some time and perhaps you've been going in the wrong direction, a human being's desire is to just continue, you know, like rather than acknowledge, oh, shoot, like being authentic about an inauthenticity is like powerful. Like, oh man, like if I'm going to be authentic right now, I want to share with you guys is like, yeah, I've been in the camp of seeing the government as an enemy, and then seeing the people all lining up with their barcodes and face masks and wanting the jab, and then having their kids want the jab and all this stuff. I've been relating to those people as like some form of sheep, which doesn't leave me with any sense of relatedness with those people. In fact, it puts me in the camp of like almost like as bad as the villain.
Yeah. So here's what I say: we always keep coming back to the universal human needs. So every single thing that we do, every action we take, every strategy we develop is an attempt to meet a need. Everything we do. So this is like a really common assumption that I think it's hard. I don't think I've never come across anyone who can sort of argue that. It's, it's clear when you think about it. Yeah, everything I do is an attempt to meet some need or another. And so if we meet on that level, so we're going to we come together with different perspectives and histories and beliefs and strategies, and it's true. And we have a tendency for tribalism. It's true. We do have it. We have needs for belonging, and if someone has a different perspective than me, that feels a little threatening on some way, because like, oh, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's some threat to a sense of companionship or belonging here happening between us. And so there is a pull towards trying to get everyone to sort of agree with me. That's all true. However, that's on the that's, you might say, on the level of belief, action. But underneath that, if we drop down one level, like I think Rumi said, out beyond the field of right and wrong, meet me there. There's this reality of universal human needs that we all share. It's a commonality we all have. And so we get curious, what is the need this person is trying? So all these people, right, they're wearing the mask, and they're, like you say, you kind of see them as sheep. And the other thing we do is we judge each other. That's just human nature. Of course we judge each other. But if we can get curious, what needs are they trying to meet? Obviously, safety. Trying to stay safe. That's understandable. Like, I get that. I want to stay safe. Who doesn't want to try to, stay as safe as possible? But then we also recognize there's other needs too, right? So it's like at a certain point, if you put all your chips in the basket of safety, now you're suddenly sacrificing things like freedom and things like that. So, right, there's balances that we have to have around different needs. But when we come together and start having dialogue around stuff like this, and we have different opinions and backgrounds and stuff, we hear each other, and then we drop down to the level, okay, what is the particular needs that are most really prominent for this? So this person's really bringing to the table what need, right? This person really wants to make sure that there's safety. Right? They really want to minimize getting really sick. Fair enough. And this person's really bringing to the table freedom. They want to actually be able to have a life that they generally feel relatively free, that they can live their life in a way that they have some sovereignty and autonomy, and they're not constantly being told what to do and can't do. Obviously within reason, this is the kind of balancing we have to have. As they say, my freedom of my fist ends at your face, kind of thing. It's like we're obviously free to a point, but we have to consider other people's needs too in the process of that. And so if we keep dropping down to the level of needs and we meet on that level, now we can develop. So it's like basically the way I say is you come together with all these different strategies and things. You drop down to the level of the basic needs, you put those needs on the table, and now from there we collaborate. Okay, everyone, so here's the needs that we really want to make sure are honored as much as possible. There's no perfect, there never will be, but it's good enough. And now we can all work together with our collective intelligence to come up with what are strategies that can ensure that we honor all these needs. Right, so that's what you do. As long as if we don't do that, we just stay butting heads with strategies, and we don't get anywhere. We just keep fighting, and we form little camps and tribes around my strategy and your strategy. We're never going to get anywhere. So that's I'm quite a strong believer in that strategy. It's really I've used it for many years in my work, and it's really, really effective. And it's so simple. It's very intuitive. Like, people get it. Oh yeah, right. The need, of course. And then we can come up with a different, and often the strategies you come up with are completely different than what anyone was even doing initially, because now that you have a bigger picture and you have more intelligence available, you'd be amazed what shows up. It's cool. It's such a cool process. Does that, I don't know if that kind of answers what you're sort of, or that reflection helpful?
It really is. I never thought of it like tribe mentality, but that was beautiful, Paris. Dan, you've got something on your mind.
I mean, I was just listening to you and thinking just how wonderful that thought was, that there's these universal human needs, and they're just so relatable. Like, yeah, we want safety. Everyone wants safety. Everyone wants a sense of freedom, sovereignty, and so on that level, we can all relate. And it's just different strategies of how we're trying to achieve that, based on our experiences and how we see things. Yeah, and also it also says to me like there's a lot of optimism here. I can feel like if we can solve this very nuanced and complex situation, wow, like our mental health is going to be enhanced like because I feel like there's a mental health crisis that we're also going through. There's, we can solve ecological issues with this same sort of framework. We can really start to build connections and move through big issues, and not just the COVID crisis, but long-term stuff. So thank you very much for that dialogue.
Yeah. Thank you. Does this feel like a good place to come to a close, or is there anything else that feels?
Well, we have a final question that we ask all of our guests, and I think it would be appropriate this time to spin it around slightly, because because of this conversation, I want to ask a bit of a weird question, which is, if you were a 7-year-old child, can you think from that age, with that sort of mind, about this situation that we're in, and sort of express something from that mind of a 7-year-old child? What's important to you, and what do people need to do from the mind of a 7-year-old?
And we just all get along. That's yeah. Well, I guess it's not really different than what I've sort of been saying. In a way, it was kind of like this. I had my mom and dad divorced when I was quite young, and they were fighting, and I could see both perspectives. Like, I loved my mom, I loved my dad, and when I was with each one, I could sort of understand their perspective, and it was so painful to see them. They were just getting horrible fights, and I just wanted them to get along, and it's so hard to see that they just couldn't see each other's humanity. They just saw each other as kind of evil and bad. So that's kind of where I'm at, like holding that space. Like I really can empathize with the different, we say sort of two sides in this situation, but there's more than that, obviously. But there's, two of the most prominent sides, you might say. They're pro-mandate, anti-mandate, or something like that. But I get it. I get both sides. I get the needs. They've got needs for safety, got needs for freedom, right? And other needs, those are probably the most prominent ones that are really coming up. And I just want to see us talk. I just want to see us quit pointing guns at each other, metaphorical guns at each other, trying to punish each other and all of this, and see each other's humanity again, like realizing we're all just doing the best we can with a shitty situation. And I just really want to, help us to talk. That's it. Lay down our weapons and let's talk. Simple as that, really.
Like you said earlier, Paris, let fear take a back seat, and let's bring love into the front seat.
That's right. Yeah, love and empathy, another close cousin of love.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Paris.
Yeah, thank you. Really, really enjoyed our dialogue, and I hope maybe we have a chance to do something like this again. It would be nice.
Oh, thank you. I'll enjoy that. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Keep
Thank
well.
you, Paris.
Thank you.